Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out on a rainy night, I must say. I want to welcome everyone, especially Mayor Bowser and Council Chair Mendelson, for coming to this evening's event, Envisioning the Future of DC. My name is Shelley Repp, and I am chair of the Committee of 100 on the Federal City. The committee was founded in 1923 to sustain and safeguard the fundamental values of the L'Enfant and Macmillan plans that give the nation's capital much of its distinction, beauty, and community character. Today, our all-volunteer organization is active citywide on community development issues, including affordable housing, land use planning and zoning, climate change, transportation, historic preservation, and open space conservation. 2023, looking back now 100 years later, is our centennial year. We're marking this milestone by holding a series of events which we're calling conversations that will focus on some of these issues. We hope you will find this and our upcoming events interesting and thought-provoking. The schedule for the rest of the year is included in the handout all of you should have received. To kick off these events, we're pleased and honored to have Mayor Muriel Bowser and DC Chairman Phil Mendelson with us this evening to share their aspirations for the next decade. We will reserve time for questions from the audience. We ask that you please write your questions and your name on the note cards provided and pass them to the outer aisle once Chairman Mendelson has completed his remarks. Someone will pick them up and I will moderate the questions. After the program, please join us for refreshments and conversation in the narthex. Since I hope we have sparked your interest in the Committee of 100, please talk to me or any of the other members identified on their badges to learn more about our organization. We welcome new members, and we hope to see you back here for our next event, An Equitable City, Realities, Opportunities, and Choices, on Saturday afternoon, February 11th, from 1 to 2:30. To introduce our speakers and begin the first conversation, I'll turn this over to Carol Ayton, a longtime trustee, co-chair of the Planning Committee, subcommittee, and chair of the group that has organized our centennial conversations.
Thank you, Shelley. Good evening, everyone. It's my great honor to introduce Mayor Muriel Bowser, the 7th mayor since Home Rule. Muriel Bowser is a lifelong resident of Washington, D.C., and grew up in a family that valued political engagement. She was first elected as a Ward 4 ANC commissioner in 2004, and she represented that ward on the city council from 2006 to 2015, when she won the Democratic primary and became the second woman mayor of Washington, D.C. She is the first Black woman to serve 3 four-year terms as mayor of any U.S. city and the first single mother to serve as D.C. mayor. Mayor Bowser functions as governor, county executive, and mayor. Indeed, the Democratic Governors Association acknowledged her extensive duties when it asked her to join last year. And of course, we all seek statehood and to sort of ratify that idea. In her inauguration address last month, she pledged to rebuild downtown and to substantially raise the number of Black homeowners while also addressing economic and racial inequities in the District of Columbia. The Committee of 100 is honored to welcome Mayor Muriel Bowser to the centennial celebration, and we look forward to a stimulating and interesting conversation with her about the city's future.
Well, good evening, everyone. I am really delighted to join you, and I'm delighted to share the stage with the chairman of the council, Phil Mendelson. And I'm always happy to talk about our city and especially the days ahead in our city. I want to congratulate the committee on 100 years of serving and working in Washington, D.C., And I certainly want to appreciate you for the many conversations that we have had over the years in my time in elected office, both as a council member and now as your mayor. I am privileged to have earned the trust of DC residents in many elections, and now this time to be a three-time mayor. And I know that next 4 years, this next 4 years is filled with both opportunity and in many ways, a lot of challenges for our city that we haven't encountered before because the last 3 years in a global pandemic has really upended a lot of systems in our city. What I'm proud of is that we have worked together. We banded together to fight the pandemic, to crush it, to manage it, to get people vaccinated. We have created the environment where it's safe for everyone to be at work, to be with their family and friends, and to engage in events like they did before. But we also know that the way of work has changed, and therefore our city, our beautiful city, has to have the plan to come back. I was privileged to address our city just a few weeks ago with Phil and other members of the council and the new attorney general. And one thing people remind me of that I said, and I have said it for a lot of years, and I say it to my teams every day, and that is that we have to win every day, and we win by winning every day, every project, and every initiative. But in order to do that, we have to have a game plan. So just a few weeks ago, we released our game plan for the city's comeback, and it's our economic strategy for the next 5 years. In that strategy, I laid out some bold goals, and in the coming months and years, we will achieve those goals by following the plans that we create together. The first goal, and an important one, and it involves how we will continue to build our middle class and protect our middle class, which will be one of my focuses for the next 4 years. We have to create 35,000 new jobs, good paying jobs for DC residents. We also have to increase the share of minority-owned employer businesses to 33% of all of our businesses. We have to eliminate key amenity gaps. Those include fresh food and grocery stores, housing, and internet across all areas and all neighborhoods in Washington, D.C., thus making our city more affordable for more people. We also have to add 15,000 residents to the downtown population and add 7 million square feet of residential units. We have to retain current residents and reach a population of 725,000 and increase the Black median income of Black households by $25,000. So when we do that, we grow, we create more vibrancy in places where we need it, we make DC more affordable, and we close some of the equity gaps that have persisted in our town. So let me talk a little bit more about how we can revive the downtown. I don't have to tell you that the downtown has taken a pretty big hit over the past 3 years. Workers have vacated their offices for telework and hybrid work opportunities. We have seen fewer people on the streets. Hospitality workers lost jobs. And many of the brick and mortar businesses that supported those workers have been forced to close. So all of that means, too, that our local economy suffers. I explained a couple of weeks ago what that means. It's not just a discussion about the downtown. Everybody here knows how important a vibrant downtown is to our capital city. But what it also means is that we lose revenues. We can lose the sales tax revenues, which are evident, but if the property values of those downtown businesses decrease, that's where the city's bottom line really takes a huge hit. And it has been the vibrancy of our downtown that has given us the ability as a city to really invest in the types of things that have brought about the Renaissance of Washington. Public schools, in the transformation of our public schools. Just in my 15 years in elective office, we've invested billions of dollars in school buildings. We have the best paid teachers anywhere in this region. And as a result, we see our urban school district outpacing other urban school districts in the nation. That has been a huge investment that a robust and thriving downtown has allowed. We've been able to invest in public safety. We have seen the complete transformation of our police force, and we will need to make even bigger investments in bringing that police force all the way back. We have the gold standard, I say, in human services programs as well, so that we can make the types of investments that match our values. We've been able to do those things because we've had a robust and growing downtown. So the converse is true. If our downtown suffers, our budgets and the revenues that we collect suffer as well. And so we'll have to make some decisions as a city. Do we keep making those types of investments? Then the money has to come from somewhere. So that's why the discussion is more than about who's sitting in their office cubicle or taking the metro. It's really about maintaining the values of our beautiful downtown, so that it's a vibrant downtown. I know that we're going to talk a lot about the beauty of our capital city here, but it's also about what the downtown does for all 8 wards. We also want to make sure that we look around the city to see some of our successes. When people went home to their neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods were more balanced in terms of commercial and residential use, those areas fared better. The downtown right now is 92% commercial and only 8% residential. That's why you hear me talking about attracting 15,000 more residents to the downtown. And as we do that, and then anyone will tell you this is not an overnight scenario. We have to work to change the spaces where we might not get those workers back. We have to fill vacant commercial spaces where we can, even if the district or others are a partner. And we have to think about changing our relationship to event organization and bringing more people, whether it be festivals or parades or races or new events that we help the private sector create. So right now, 25,000 people call the downtown home, and adding 15,000 people will help us create a 24/7 thriving mixed-use neighborhood. So we have some ideas in the way that the district can partner with property owners who have buildings that can convert to housing, and we will need to work together about what we do with buildings that are difficult to convert to housing. Some of those buildings are privately owned, and some of them are owned by the federal government. So to make that happen, we will have to do a lot of work and to see what investments will work to incent people to change their properties, and what regulations we have to look at as well to make that happen. You've probably heard I have one idea. And that idea is to make sure that our Federal Height Act will allow us to create greater density in the downtown. And so I expect that we're going to have a lot of conversations about exactly that. But I don't want to give anybody the impression that I favor blowing up restrictions on height in the district. But I do think there could be opportunities to tinker with it, to to allow for the types of conversions and density that we will need moving forward. So if we don't put everything on the table, if we don't think differently, if we aren't bold, if we aren't willing to make the investments, we can't expect to win our workers back or win our fight to create more balance in the downtown. So I know, that one avenue that we have to pursue, and we will, is making sure that our federal partners are at the table with us. And we have begun those conversations, and I expect that they will continue. You've heard me say that we favor a centralized approach to how the federal government will send its workers back, and that continues to be our request of the White House. We also know, though, that there will be buildings that we continue to think are underutilized and need new uses, and that is a longer-term discussion. In a couple of budgets, I have presented to the council a tool that we also need, and that tool is the Vitality Fund. And that fund will allow us, the people that work for us in our economic development office, to compete for new employers to come to the downtown. Our city is known, of course, for federal government workers, workers in the education space, and in the medical and technology space. And we see a new opportunity to attract businesses who may not have thought about our downtown before. They may have thought it was too expensive. They may have thought that their company didn't fit in. They may have thought it was too commercial and not enough residential. So we think we have opportunities to attract new businesses. And that Vitality Fund it will allow us to provide the economic development tools to compete with our peer regions and our nearby neighbors. We recently made the first award to Virtru. It is a cutting-edge cybersecurity company that has committed to leasing office space for 13 years in downtown DC, and it intends to increase the size of its workforce exponentially. So that means more jobs and more opportunities for DC residents, which will contribute to our goal of 35,000 new jobs. So as you can see, there are detailed conversations to be had, but the broad outline of our economic development strategy points to how we can attract more people to the district overall, more people to our downtown, have more Black homeowners and Black businesses, and make sure that every neighborhood has the types of amenities that will attract DC residents, thus making DC more affordable for more people. So I'm honored to be here. It's my privilege to be your mayor, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. The Committee of 100 welcomes DC Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, a former Committee of 100 trustee and longtime member, to the first of our centennial conversations about the future of the District of Columbia. Chairman Mendelson left Cleveland, Ohio in 1970 to attend American University and then never left DC. He worked as a council staffer and then served as an ANC 3C commissioner. He was elected to the council in 1998 and has served as council chair since 2012, holding the distinction of the longest-serving chair. The mayor and chairman are the two most powerful elected officials in D.C., and Mayor Bowser and Chairman Mendelson are perhaps the most effective people to ever hold those positions. No one will have more influence on the future of the District of Columbia than these two, and we are excited and honored to hear their perspectives on the next 10 years and to engage them in conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually came with more of notes to just speak for a little bit, recognizing that this is supposed to be more of a conversation. And I'm just feeling a little mischievous, so I'm going to acknowledge my former boss, former Councilmember Jim Nathanson, who also is a former trustee of the Committee of 100. Yes, Jim used to try to tell me what to do, sometimes successfully. So I decided to take this approach, and I hope I'm not going to be real long with speeches because I want to value the opportunity for questions. But I looked at the question, where do I see the city in 5 to 10 years? My two biggest concerns right now are population growth. We really were excited over the last decade that the city was growing, and it was growing, 12,000 a year, 1,000 a month, and then it slowed down a bit. But it doesn't feel like we're growing so much right now, and that's a concern because with growth comes a lot more vitality to the city. And my other concern, biggest concern right now, is what I would characterize as an anemic downtown. We really had a growing downtown, a lot of activity, as the mayor said, had a lot to do with our revenue base. And with the pandemic and the offices closing down and the federal government not coming back, it's really unclear what the future of our downtown is. Now, the interesting thing as I thought about this is that I also looked or reflected on what we did a couple years ago with the comprehensive plan, which was introduced in the council by the mayor and went through the committee of the whole, which I chair. And when we updated the comprehensive plan a couple years ago, we weren't concerned about population growth, and we weren't concerned about an anemic downtown. Our primary concern was housing and affordable housing. And I don't want to suggest that that's gone away, but I'm not sure that that's quite front and center the way, or maybe solely occupies first place the way it did a few years ago. And when we updated the comprehensive plan, focusing on housing and affordable housing, we updated a plan from about 15 years ago when the primary concern was stimulating economic development east of 15th Street. So if you look at it that way, our concern today is probably not going to be the concern 10 years from now. What our concern was only a few years ago is not really our concern today, and what our concern was 15 years ago was not our concern when we updated the comprehensive plan. So it's kind of hard to really know what we need to do about the problem 5, 10 years from now when we don't really know exactly what that problem is. But as I said, my biggest concern right now is population growth and anemic downtown. When we updated the comprehensive plan, we created in it a lot of flexibility for more development in commercial areas and around the whole city, not just simply targeting a few specific areas which we wanted to revitalize from being impoverished, but rather really looking at opportunity for much more development around the city. And that flexibility is there. So I don't know that we need to address the comprehensive plan or take that kind of approach. What can we do to make it easier for development to come to the city when we did that just a couple of years ago? And I would note as well, I don't agree with the suggestion that we should be tinkering with the HIDE Act, but those of you who've looked at the HIDE Act, zoning in most of the city is below what the HIDE Act allows. And development, that is the built city, in most of the city is below what zoning allows. And there are millions of square feet that are available to be developed right now without any changes in the law, maybe some changes in the zoning in order to reflect where we are with the comprehensive plan. But my feeling is that development is not the solution to our current problem, which is population growth in an anemic downtown. Rather, I think we should step back and think about what makes our city attractive. If we want to attract folks to come here, if we want to, in fact, ensure that people who are here continue to see the city as attractive and want to stay here, what are those factors? Now, I don't have a complete list here, but this is a list that comes to my mind. Public safety. I think the city's pretty safe. And the mayor and I have been at a few events recently talking to people who are concerned about whether the city is safe. I think it's pretty safe, but nonetheless, there is a concern and a pervasive concern about public safety in the city. And to be sure, if we want folks to come downtown, to live downtown or to come downtown for events, let's just say populate downtown, whether it's by day or 24 hours, they have to feel safe. So we ought to be looking at what can we do to ensure or increase people feeling safe about public safety. The second and this isn't necessarily in order of priority, is public education. I think that's especially important for those young people, young families who think that they get a better education by moving out of the city. And we've kind of lost sight of that. I mean, that used to be talked about much more a couple decades ago, but I think it's just as true today. Public education is a tool, in my view, to make the city more attractive. A third is activities and nightlife. We have a lot of vibrancy in spite of the pandemic around the city, around town, but not downtown, or not as much downtown. And it's not just restaurants, but it's theaters, and it's not just theaters, it's special events. Mayor mentioned that, just the different kinds of events, the kind of stuff that makes the city interesting. So a family who's empty nesters now in Virginia, and they realize that there are things to do in DC. And actually, it's kind of easier for them if they live in DC rather than having to drive into the city a couple nights a week. That's looking at how do we make the city more attractive in terms of population growth and stimulating downtown through activities and nightlife, and looking at just how can we make that more robust. And then last on my list, and again, it's not a complete list, is getting the federal government back into offices. The former mayor, Anthony Williams, talks about how when the federal government, by law, wants to close a military base, they have to go through this long process. And part of the reason is because when they close a military base, they really affect the economic activity outside, all around that base. And here, the federal government has taken away, because they haven't come back to the offices, tens of thousands of workers. Now, I'm not saying it's a base closing, but if you think about it, it's kind of the same sort of impact. And without all those workers, all the retail activities are struggling downtown, and the city doesn't feel as busy or as active, and therefore is less attractive. So getting the federal government back into their offices is another strategy. None of those strategies, public safety, public education, activities and nightlife, federal government coming back, involve development. And that's not to say that development's a horrible thing, but I will note development takes a long time. And I think we need to be looking in the short term, the next 5 years, at revitalizing downtown or getting downtown back. And development takes much longer than that. Now, I've been focusing on that, but I do want to note that we still have what I consider a housing crisis in the city. And I think the mayor has been very good about proposing year after year with the budget, in the budget as well as strategies around the budget for dealing with the affordable housing crisis. And I always characterize it as not just about affordable housing, but housing as well. Because if we don't have enough market rate housing, then folks who can afford market rate will be looking at lower income housing as their opportunity, which means then there's less affordable housing for residents. So we have to be looking at it broadly. And I bring this up in part because as chairman of the council, I have the opportunity through the National League of Cities to, from time to time, meet with city council presidents from other cities. And recently I was in California, and guess what we were talking about? The affordable housing crisis. And every time I'm with city council presidents, and in other cities, they're talking about the affordable housing crisis. This is a problem across the United States, and it's a problem that isn't going to get solved without the federal government stepping up and reversing the disinvestment that they've, over the last couple of decades, with regard to affordable housing. We're doing a lot, and I would argue that on a per capita basis, we're doing more than any other city in this country. And it's still not enough by tens of thousands of units. And if we want to have a economically diverse city, then we need to ensure that we continue to have housing at all income, available to all income levels of residents. So that's important as well. And I'll kind of leave it with that and be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Once again, if you have questions, write them on the cards and pass them to the outer aisle. Somebody will pick them up and they'll be transported up here. So please, we encourage questions. I have a couple here to start out with. But that's just to sort of get things moving here. Let's talk about the fiscal crisis or fiscal issues, put it that way. At a committee of 100 membership meeting in November, DC Auditor Kathy Patterson remarked that the city is facing a fiscal cliff later this year as federal pandemic funding begins to wind down. What can be done to address the loss of funding? How will it affect the programs each of you have championed?
Somebody behind the curtain must have hit the switch. I'm actually looking to the mayor to address this first because she's going to be submitting the budget March 22nd and have the first crack at the proposal for how we deal with the budget for next year. It is true that the several $billion we got a couple of years ago from the federal government only lasts so long, and I think that's what Kathy Patterson was referring to as a fiscal cliff. It's also true that the revenue estimates as recently as December show that our revenues continue to grow and are substantially higher today than what they were projected to be a year ago. So there's a balancing that's necessary, and I'm sure there'll be some adjustments. But generally, we have structured the budget where there's what we call one-time funding, and the federal funding would be one-time, is used for one-time expenditures rather than recurring expenditures.
I would agree with what Phil says. We are in our budget process right now. I think March, I submit a balanced budget to the council, and the auditor knows well it will be balanced. We will look at all of our priorities, the things that are already in place and the things that are new that we need to fund, and make some very strategic decisions about funding them. I feel really confident that we were responsible with the federal funds that we received, and we didn't make long-term commitments about how those funds would be used, but they were used for their immediate purposes. We're also going to have another infusion of federal dollars related to the infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure law. Some of that is formulaic, and it's going to be we'll be able to invest it in safer streets and connecting communities and in some of our infrastructure that is in real need. So I actually feel pretty positive about this budget cycle.
Well, as a taxpayer, I'm pleased that that's the result here. So, I know that Chairman Mendelson mentioned the comprehensive plan and the upcoming rewrite of the comprehensive plan. First of all, do you think it's necessary at this point in time, since we just went through the process, to go through it again starting in a year or two? Number one. Number two, I mean, assuming we do, what are your goals for changes that you would propose in the plan?
I can't tell you that I've started thinking about the rewrite because I like you, I think I have the most recent update in our recent memory. We took many, many years to work on it and get it right. I think it was unanimously approved at the council. But I think Phil raised some key observations that if a changed environment requires us to think differently about the downtown, for example, I can't tell you the number of people who said to me, well, how can you have 15,000 people? Where are those kids going to go to school? Or how are your other public amenities supporting those new goals? So the biggest thing that I would say is that we have to focus on having more people live in places where they haven't lived, that this plan contemplated.
I will add to that. the modifications that we adopted a couple years ago, which was almost a rewrite of the comprehensive plan, it was a bit painful. And it was a bit painful because the document has only gotten longer and longer and longer. It consists of, if I remember correctly, about 16 chapters. We call them elements. And it's as if each element at some point was written by a different person. So there's a lot of repetitiveness, except the repetitiveness is written differently. And so there's a lot of inconsistency between the different elements, and it's just painful. And in addition, because people felt that there was just a level of dissatisfaction that even though we, as I said earlier, increased density and we focused more on housing, and we also, I didn't mention this before, focused on racial equity and the need to think about that and factor that into planning and zoning decisions. There was a feeling that because of these inconsistencies in the plan has become just so broad in its reach. It talks about human services and transportation, historic preservation, urban design. As I said, there are 16 chapters that there was a feeling maybe we didn't get it right, and then things are changing. And we did adopt this, I believe it was in 2021, maybe it was early 2022. So we hadn't come out of the pandemic. We didn't know exactly what things were going to be like. So we need to take another turn at this, but with an eye toward it being much more concise and manageable as a document. Now, I'm hopeful that that's what the Office of Planning will do.
Thank you. Following up a little bit on what you said. I think I forget whether it's 15 or 20,000 new residents in 5 years, right? Right. And many more in 2040, right? So as far as the services that would go with that, looking at parkland, is there going to be enough parkland for all these new residents, particularly those that are living downtown? And what is the district's plan to locate and pay for additional parkland?
I think that if we have to answer that question, it's a good question to answer. And we have a very recent example of how we have transformed a federal parcel that was underutilized. It was green for sure, but it was hardly used as a park. And in partnership, using our local dollars, we have helped transform Franklin Park. I think there are many other examples with the circle parks or the other federal parcels in and around the downtown that are ripe for that type of investment as well.
I would add, over the last couple of decades, the city has done a good job of revitalizing and expanding our recreation centers. So there are a lot of recreation centers around the city, as you all know. We have a lot of green space and parks. So I don't know that that's as much of a concern with regard to getting more population downtown. But if you think about Noma as an example, Noma, which has seen a lot of development, residential development in the last 10, 15 years, they realized as they were developing that they didn't have enough, I'm going to say parkland, but it was more recreational space. And so they very intentionally planned additional recreational space. Some of that was I want to say developed privately. That's not quite right. It was sort of a public-private partnership where the city contributed. We put money in our capital budget, but the private sector, the different development companies in Noma contributed substantially. And it's 2 or 3 parks in the Noma area. So if we see that we have that need downtown, we will look at options there as well.
Yes, I've heard about the Noma issues. It points to the need for advanced planning, I think, and that's certainly something that the Committee of 100 has supported all along, is we need to have planning. Next question here. How will you make sure that the growth and vibrant downtown that you hope to create and that the Committee of 100 hopes to create will benefit all Washingtonians equitably?
I think it's a fair question that that was a major component of our discussion when we released the plan. And that's why you see a big focus on creating jobs in industry, high need and high growth industry that we know DC residents can work in. And that is a key part of how we have a more equitable Washington. And that is also how we'll get to increase the median incomes of Black families in the district.
I want to emphasize what I said before, and that is when we talk about housing, the need for housing is broadly affects all income strata. So we shouldn't be only looking at low or extremely low income housing, not that that's explicitly what the question was about. We also have, as a matter of policy, written into law that if the district government is involved with the property, that there has to be a significant percentage of the housing that has to be affordable. If I remember correctly, I don't know that this would apply downtown, but it can be as much as 30%. And there are actually some projects that the mayor and the deputy mayor for planning and economic development have sponsored that have been, I think, almost 100% affordable. We also have through inclusionary zoning a requirement for affordable housing. So we have in place policies that would require a number of affordable units if there's new residential housing.
I have a question here about teacher pay. Said schools are crucial to DC's future. Committee of 100 certainly agrees with that. Teacher turnover is high, morale is often low. Yet an op-ed in the Post last week pointed out that due to an obscure DC code provision, 25% or more teachers will not be paid the retroactive pay announced last November because they will be off the payroll by the time the council ratifies the deal, 3.5 years after the last deal expired in 2019. Don't all teachers who worked those 3 years during COVID and remote classes deserve equal pay as required by DC law?
I think we're going to follow the law for sure. And we're very proud of the agreement that we reached with teachers. And we're even prouder of the workforce that we built in DC public schools. And we're looking forward to not only the retroactive pay, but the bonuses being paid.
So the teacher's contract just came to the council last Friday, and we may be able to act on it. The council may be able to act on it as early as February 7th. And there will be a hearing. I don't know if you know this. I discussed this with the city administrator this afternoon, that we will have a hearing. It won't be open to all of the public, but it will for sure include the representatives of the teachers union as well as the executive. In my view, collective bargaining is very important, and the council needs to look at these collective bargaining agreements from the viewpoint of whether what is actually being presented to us was bargained. But if it was bargained, I don't think we should second guess it. That may sound a little strange, but we've had instances where contracts have come to the council and there have been a lot of issues around it. And I always fall back on, was it bargained? Was there anything wrong with the bargaining process? And otherwise, we should approve the contract. The issue here has to do with the fact that there's a significant part of the contract that is retroactive, and there are teachers who've left over the last several years. My understanding, but I haven't looked at the contract yet that carefully, is that the contract that was agreed to by the teachers union pertains to the teachers who are currently on the payroll. And, you know, it's a legitimate concern, but it arguably is outside the bargaining process. I should say outside of what was bargained.
Okay, affordable housing. Affordable housing, you know, we are a big supporter of more affordable housing. The Committee of 100 is. You know, I live in Ward 3, and the question here is, Ward 3 is the most efficient in affordable housing. We were sorry that the city did not acquire the Wardman Hotel during its bankruptcy. What are your strategies for achieving your goal of 1,990 new units of affordable housing in Ward 3?
Well, we have several projects that we are looking at that are right now that include city-owned property, specifically in Chevy Chase. And we're looking at all of the underutilized parcels as we see it to see how we can have more affordability there, as well as tools. We have to be able to help buy down affordability in those projects and have a range of incomes that can be in those properties, including workforce housing. And so we advanced one such tool, and I'm going to forget now if we made the investment in Ward 3 that would allow for more workforce housing.
The only thing I would add is that this was part of the modifications to the comprehensive plan a couple years ago, allowed for more density in Chevy Chase and Friendship Heights, and spoke specifically about increasing the supply of affordable housing in those areas.
The March conversation that we're going to hold on March 11th, is going to deal with climate change. So the question here is, there are serious air quality and heat island issues, especially in wards 7 and 8, leading to health problems and even deaths. Does DC have a plan to significantly increase the tree canopy and make other remediations in those areas, particularly in wards 7 and 8?
I think that's a great point, and we do need more trees. And we've planted thousands of trees throughout the district, and we work with outstanding partners to help us plant and maintain trees throughout the district. And I'm going to have our Department of the Environment share with you exactly where we see the biggest investments in trees in the next years.
To answer the question more broadly, the council and the mayor have done a lot with regard to the environment and climate change and getting greener. An example is we lead the country in number of LEED certified buildings, if I remember correctly, and we adopted an energy bill in 2018 that is one of the I would say is at the forefront in the country in terms of promoting green energy and getting away from fossil fuels. We are still debating in the council and with the mayor about retrofitting buildings, which are a major contributor to greenhouse gases. How do we do that? That's not too disruptive while at the same time advances where we want to be in terms of a greener or having less of a deleterious effect on the environment. With regard to trees, I look to Casey Trees as an important partner. I authored the tree legislation that is the law. It wasn't implemented or wasn't adopted exactly the way I had authored it. I think it's a little bit too bureaucratically cumbersome. The idea is to encourage folks to keep trees when they have them and to encourage folks to plant more trees and in that way to increase the tree canopy. And I am looking to, because I sat down with Casey Trees last summer, I'm looking to introduce a bill that I hope will adopt some refinements to the tree legislation to increase the canopy. My impression is that the canopy is actually reduced in the last 10 years. And if I remember correctly, Casey Trees told me I was wrong. That's not to say that it's increased very much, and we could do better.
Okay, that March event that I was talking about, we're going to focus on the Ward 7 and 8 and the Anacostia region, Anacostia River region. I don't know if Dennis Chestnut and Chris Williams from that area are with us tonight. I guess not. I know Dennis was planning to be here, but that's going to be our focus in March. On crime. I mean, certainly the crime is in the newspaper these days. I read about it. We all read about it. And certainly, the focus of this part of the focus of the city has been on prevention. What, how can we do things better to try to address the crime issue in the city? And because, as you say, I mean, it's, that's what people talk about when they're at Starbucks is it safe? So.
The mayor and I think I'm going to go first for a couple of rounds. I think we can have an effect on crime by focusing more on closing cases. There are a lot of crimes that are committed that are not closed by the police, they're not solved. Closing cases and also getting the U.S. attorney who prosecutes all of our felonies to be more aggressive about some of the prosecutions. The literature on criminology is pretty clear that the greatest deterrent effect comes from what I call, or the literature refers to as, swift and certain justice. Somebody commits a crime, they're swiftly caught, they're swiftly prosecuted, there's justice. And I think there's not as much attention to those two factors, closing cases and getting them prosecuted aggressively. A few years ago, I did a presentation to the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, which is made up of all the public safety agency directors. And my focus was on gun violence and what we could do to reduce gun violence. And my theory was this, that when somebody commits a crime, they make a couple of choices. One is to commit a crime, and the other is how to commit the crime. Maybe a few more choices. But in the how, too many people choose the how to include a gun. And if we focus on guns, then maybe we can actually, through a variety of actions, have a deterrent effect on that choice. And there's actually some, I'm going to call it a feedback loop with gun violence, and that is that if everybody I know is carrying a gun, then I'm probably going to carry a gun. And I might carry a gun because I want to be safe with everybody else who's carrying a gun. Or conversely, if very few people are carrying guns, then there's less likely to be fewer people carrying guns. Kind of feeds on itself. If the prosecutors, for instance, the U.S. attorney had a gun prosecution unit, if the courts had a gun court, because there are jurisdictions that do this, if Department of Corrections reminded inmates on a daily basis that we have enhanced penalties for crimes where a gun is used, looking at all the different agencies and how they could step up with regard to guns, I think that could have a deterrent effect. But they'd have to do it in coordination. They can't do it piecemeal. That was my hypothesis. And I still stand by that. So I think a focus on guns could reduce the lethality of crime. And focusing on closing cases would have more of a deterrent effect, and the prosecutors prosecuting aggressively.
I would agree with a lot of what Phil has said. I will add on the case closure point, that is certainly true. Making sure that if you commit a crime, there are certain consequences. And in this city, there are not certain consequences. You may be arrested, you may not be prosecuted. If you're prosecuted, you may not be sentenced. If you're sentenced, your sentence may be reduced. There is not certain consequences for crime in the city, not for adults and not for children, and we have to address that. Case closures, too, are impacted. In the last 2 years, we have seen the ranks of our Metropolitan Police Department reduced by almost 500 officers. You can't have efficient police work if you don't have enough police. So we have to get back on track to have the number of police that we need to deploy in neighborhoods in the way that neighbors expect, to do investigations, to do undercover work, to work with our federal partners who have been tremendous working with us, and especially in these last couple of years, on major crime, major gun rings, major drug rings that I know that work will keep our city safer. So those things are hugely, hugely important. I agree that there has to be certain consequences for criminal activity in our city. And so I also agree with the focus on gun crime. The truth is that we have seen decreases in violent crime in our city. Even last year, which was a tough year for us, we had a 7% decrease in violent crime overall and reductions in property crime overall. Where we saw a sharp increase was in gunshots and people shot by guns or people killed by guns. Now, if you turn on your news, and for the first 6 minutes, I timed it. I time it on the local news. It's usually the first 6 minutes. It's all crime. Some of that crime is in the district. Some of it is in the whole region. But what you hear is crime, crime, crime. Then there's a commercial. And when they come back from the commercial, there's another 6 minutes that recap the crime that they just talked about, at the start of the show. So it's more crime, 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 crime. So in order for us to deal with all of that, I believe that a focus on people who use guns before they shoot somebody. And so that is the crime that my team focuses on, and that's felons in possessions of guns. Now, some people think that's no big deal, that if you just having a gun, this doesn't mean you'll use it, or if you have it in your house in the closet, so what? But what we know is that when people show up with guns, they're more likely to turn into a young person who's not only carrying a gun, but a young person whose first crime is committed with a gun. So I think that there is a lot of work for us to do on the enforcement side. And on the prevention side, we have heavily invested as a city in what is a fairly new body of work in the criminal justice space, and that is in this violence interruption. We're 5 years. We started pretty much in earnest in 2018. We've hired people who are close to the communities and close to the pain, as some people would say. And the hope and promise of these programs is that people who are heavily involved in cycles of violence or cycles of trauma, more specifically, are getting into more productive avenues, whether it is with therapy, job training, and very, very intensive supports from the city. So we're working on all of those things.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you support areas of downtown being permanently closed to cars? I know that's come up in other cities as a way to deal with the climate issues.
I do not now. I'm not opposed to the idea of having car-free spaces in the district. And I think especially in COVID, we really learned lessons about how to share public space. The streeteries have been a huge success. Our open streets have been huge successes. We brought back other special events and festivals. But I can't see myself saying out right now, oh, don't bring your car here. Because I think that sends the wrong message about our downtown right now.
I agree with what the mayor said, and I'll add this. Some of you may remember that in the 1970s, revitalizing downtown was the Streets for the People, which closed off several block segments from automobiles. And I mean, that was going to save downtown and turn things around. And those streets have all reopened, and that idea was abandoned. So I think we need to be much more thoughtful about this.
Okay, now this is going to be I don't know, maybe a tricky question here. It's a tougher question here. And I think you have differing views on the Hyde Act between the two of you. But right now, the vacancy rate downtown and in Friendship Heights, for that matter, too, is pretty high. Shouldn't we try to fill up the existing buildings before we try to build higher?
You say we have differing views. We're not that far apart, I don't think. I won't speak for you. I agree with Phil, and Phil knows I have been very supportive of him in past initiatives related to the Height Act. We have a special city. We have a beautiful city built on LaFont's plan. And in some ways, the lowness of our skyline is a part of what makes us special, or in some ways a monument in itself. So on that, I agree. But what I don't agree with is saying that small changes to it would throw it all away. And I think that we have to, if we know that we have to change buildings, that we have to be willing to think about what changes are necessary to make that transition possible.
So I think rather than focusing on disagreement, I'm going to speak to why I think the Height Act is of such value to the city. And I'll start with this. You know, when I go to another city like New York City and the skyscrapers, there's a sort of dynamism there that's kind of exciting. But on the other hand, that's great for another city. What is so wonderful about the Height Act in the District of Columbia is that it's unique, somewhat the same as Paris, France, so not completely unique. It gives us a character. It's a character that has more of a human scale. It's a character that when you look at the skyline, the height limit is punctured in a few places by monuments. And when I say monuments, like the National Cathedral or the old post office clock tower, you see those, they stand out. It's a different experience, and one that I think is beautiful, that's unique, that is our character of our city. And it's something that if we abandon the Height Act, and I'm not saying you're saying that, but if we abandon the Height Act in the name of development, we can't get it back. So it's, in my view, it's important to preserve, and it really makes the city, gives it more of a character. I said earlier in my remarks that because the issue of the Height Act has come up for decades, it comes up in these periodic cycles, and in the early 70s, there was a very extensive report that was issued that talked about how what we needed to revitalize the city was to get rid of the Height Act entirely. Development's not that simple. And if you think about, for instance, affordable housing, Manhattan isn't the place to go to find affordable housing with all of its skyscrapers. So we have a lot of development capacity, and we don't need to be changing the Height Act, and it's a character that I think is quite wonderful. So come down 13th Street. Thank you. Come down 13th Street by Cardozo. I'm sure you've all done this at one point or another, and just look at the skyline of the city and how beautiful it is. Or go over to east of the river, like the, I was going to say the Point, but that's on St. Elizabeth's, on the Our Lady of Perpetual Help campus, and look at the skyline of the city. Look for these vistas where you can just see all the buildings, the lower scale, but then, as I said, punctuated by these monuments. And it's really quite striking, and it's worth fighting for.
Thank you. Thank you. During your current term, many important public properties will change hands. This may be one of our best opportunities to begin preparations for returning land to families from which it was taken. This could begin with Berry Farm. Are these kinds of discussions taking place? We have got to start somewhere.
Well, there's been a long discussed development of Berry Farm. It is one of the Housing Authority's properties. It is a plan that has gone through their board. Just a few months ago, we broke ground on one of the first buildings there. And I think what's important about all of those new community developments is that we follow what has been the commitment of the city, and that's a build first strategy, that we build replacement housing, we replace the public housing, and we add more levels of affordability on the site. So when Berry Farm is complete, I think we'll have almost 1,100 units at varying levels of affordability.
I was a little confused by the question because it spoke of returning land to families. And maybe you're right, Mayor, that was about the building first, which is policy of the city now, that when we redevelop like public housing sites, that the residents have a right to return or a right to replacement housing that's in or very
Correct.
near that housing site. But I mentioned before, we have in the law for dispositions of government land a requirement for affordable housing. I guess I'm saying two things. In the comp plan, we wrote in specifically like a build first, and to ensure a right of return or replacement housing. That's one. And the other is requiring that for city dispositions, if there's residential that's going to be built, that there has to be a substantial component of affordable housing.
Thank you. We have two sort of related questions here. One deals with life expectancy. The life expectancy of Black and white residents has widened. What measures are you taking to close this gap? Sort of related here is gentrification has deepened racial inequality. The difference between Blacks and whites stands at $96,000. I guess that's an income. Mayor Bowser mentioned that she wanted to expand the middle class and increase Black household income by $25,000. However, won't the district's priority on gentrification of the economy undermine these goals?
If the question is, will attracting people to the district undermine the goals, I guess that is one way to look at it. But what we know is that when we grow our tax base, we can invest in the types of programs and services that will raise the incomes of our residents. And that's how we have to focus. We know when we attract good paying jobs and train our residents for those jobs, that's how we eliminate gaps in income in our city. And we have to have good paying jobs. And so having a focus on employers who will hire DC residents don't necessarily require college diplomas. Our focus in our schools on training our kids in the 12th grade to both go to school, perhaps go to college or go to work, so that they're earning and learning and graduating with some specific experience in the areas that we need. I'll give you an example. We are partnered with Trinity University, for example, that are training kids in the health fields. They're at Coolidge High School, where we have a health academy, so that we can have our residents filling some of the jobs right now that are going unfilled for nurses. For people who are in all of the allied health professions, which is a critical need in our city, where our residents can earn a good wage that will allow them to live well in DC.
So my answer to that question is that I don't think that stopping development or halting population growth is going to improve equity or equality. My immediate illustration of that would be looking at the city in the 70s, 80s, 90s when the population was declining and we were struggling to get economic growth. And I wouldn't say that equity or equality was improving during those decades. Equity is important. The city government is doing much more in that regard than it was only a few years ago. The mayor has an office on racial equity. The council has an office on racial equity. Ours is different in that ours is focused on legislation. Yours is focused on agencies and policies. So we're giving a lot more attention. And I think the way to deal with equity is to look at strategies or programs that would actually make a difference in terms of equity. So just as an example, and I don't know that it's the greatest example, but a couple years ago, the council adopted legislation creating a baby bond program. So the children who are born into poverty, for instance, a parent who are on Medicaid that the city will put aside in an account. I think it's $1,000 a year up to the age of 18. And at that point, the young adult has money to go to college or to start a business. It's restricted in how it can be used, but rather broadly in the restrictions. And it's an effort at trying to get some, not a lot, but some wealth to that individual born in poverty so that they have an opportunity to use that money at the age of 18 for something that actually could make a difference in their achievement in their future, whether it's education or starting a business. I'm not saying that's the greatest example, but it is an example of focusing on equity and what can we do to change the wealth gap or the income gap and to deal with these important equity issues.
Thank you. The public housing, what will each of you do to support public housing so the district's most vulnerable residents have safe and accessible public housing, especially those who earn up to 50% of median family income? Well, and I guess, do you think we need more public housing too? That's the overarching question.
I'll go first on this. Well, one of the things that we did, the council did, was to support the mayor's proposal to create a sort of a control board on a temporary basis to take over management of our public housing. Public housing is important. The council has also put in the budget the last several years money in the capital budget. You know, public housing is actually a federal program, and the federal government, as I said earlier, has disinvested from public housing across the country, and our city has stepped up. We stepped up a few years ago to, through our own dollars, not federal dollars, provide security in public housing projects, and now we've stepped up to put over $100 million into the Housing Authority for capital improvements. So we are investing. We supported the mayor's proposal to have this control board to better get the Housing Authority back on its feet. We do need public housing. I think that was part of the question. But as I think about it, where we get the greatest leverage in terms of creating more affordable units is by working with the private sector, not just simply building more public housing projects. Keep the projects we have. No loss in units, maybe increase units in Public Housing Authority, but also do more leveraging with the private sector.
I agree 100% with Phil. 100%.
Well, that's because we supported your proposal.
100%.
And that was a fight in the council. It was.
Maybe.
But let me add one thing, because when we think of public housing, people frequently don't realize that the most public housing we support is through a voucher. We have about 8,000 units in public housing properties, over 13,000, or maybe, actually, I may have that number wrong. Is it 13? Or 13,000 housing vouchers where someone who qualifies for public housing takes the voucher and goes on the market and gets an apartment. And I think also what's lost in the public housing discussion is we want people to use public housing when they need it, and then we want them to be able to get great jobs and the training that they need and be able to let someone else have the opportunity to use that voucher or that public housing unit. And so that's also important when we talk about the need to create more affordable units. It's the other side of public housing for many families in DC. And one program that we created through our Department of Human Services is a way, we call it Career Map, where people can be enrolled in Career Map and not lose all of their benefits if their housing benefit is cycled off. So those are important programs that we're piloting, and we're seeing some early success.
Actually, maybe we should end now since you're in total agreement on something. So that's a good thing. There's one question here. It sort of builds on a question before. So the safety issue. So I'll ask this one. Maybe this will be our last question, Carol. In April 2021, the Council's Police Reform Commission issued its report and recommendations. Overall, their guidance was to decenter policing as the primary means to create public safety, shifting investment to prevention and community resources. Do you agree with this approach or not? I mean, we sort of touched upon this before, but since it's an important issue, ask it again.
Well, first, I'll take credit for appointing the Police Reform Commission. It was an idea that came, it wasn't an idea that came from me. It was Councilmember Gray and Councilmember Bonds who introduced the amendment. And this happened right after George Floyd's murder. And I think there was very important reflection, not just in the district, but around the country about policing and whether we had policing right. I still think there are a lot of problems with policing, and I'm not thinking specifically of the district, but when you turn on the news, and maybe it's the third 6-minute segment, talking about cops who stop somebody, and the next thing you know, they're dead, and they didn't have a gun, and they weren't resisting. There's just something wrong with the fact that people end up dead at the hands of police, and they're not shooting. Sometimes they're running. Having said that, there were a lot of recommendations from the Reform Commission. I think all of the recommendations are worth looking at very seriously and considering. The most important recommendations had to do with accountability, which I think is very important. Police are unique among government officials in that they have the ability to take liberty, deprive people of liberty, and to take life. And they need to be accountable, have a level of accountability that's much greater than anybody else who doesn't have that right to deprive liberty or take life. And it doesn't mean that we need to be onerous or burdensome on the police. We want them to do their jobs, and we want them to have some flexibility, use their judgment in doing their jobs. But that judgment shouldn't be that, what was it, there was somebody who was fatally killed when the officer thought they had a taser? That was in somebody's car, somebody in a car. I'm not going to go through all the incidents. And there were a number of recommendations that came out of the commission to look at accountability, and that is basically more levels of review in their complaints and more access to evidence such as body camera footage to see what actually happened, and also, and the police really don't like this, removing their ability to, through the bargaining process, define their disciplinary process. And none of that's meant to disrespect the police, but to ensure that the police who care and are doing a good job and are compassionate with other individuals are celebrated, and those who are careless about life are held accountable. Mayor?
I don't recall all of the recommendations from the commission, so I don't want to speak specifically to that. And I don't support this notion of reducing the police force, or they call it decentering. It really meant that we defunded the police for 2 years, and it's going to take us many, many years to make up for that. We took police out of school buildings, and I think in 2 years, there'll be no police in school buildings. And Phil and I were at a meeting recently where, unprompted by us, a principal stood up and said that they wanted the school resource officers back, and there was a 3-minute standing ovation from the other 100 principals. I kid you not. So it's had a real impact in their view on how they can safely manage their buildings. I think there are other things that I would quibble with about that, but I won't, because I think where I stand now with my team and with the council and the new council chair and the prosecutors and the judges is we just really have to figure out what parts of those legislation are really untenable. And let's have a process to change it. That is our process. That is a local process. And that is my commitment to the people that work for me and the people that I'm responsible for making sure that they're safe. And that's the residents of the district. So I think we have some work to do. I think it is right and understandable that in the wake of George Floyd's murder, that we all look at ourselves and figure out how we can promote public safety better and support our police officers better. But it is also not right to say that the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. is in the same place as in Minneapolis, because it's just not true.
I'm going to add a little bit to that, and that's not to disagree with anything you said, but I'll add this. In my view, we have to find the right balance. So when you look at a lot of activity where police are called, it's not necessary that a police officer be there. Now, it may be that a police officer responds, but it may be a mental health incident. Police officer responds, recognizes it's mental health, ensures that mental health professionals arrive on the scene, just as an example. And that's not meant to defund, decenter, well, maybe a little bit decenter in the sense that police may not be necessary for every incident when it's possible to deal with that incident more appropriately if it is, for example, mental health. I don't think we got the right balance a couple of years ago, but on the other hand, we, like the rest of the country, were reacting to the George Floyd murder, and there's so many other murders that suddenly became apparent to us that were unnecessary. And so it's not removing the police, reducing the police, but ensuring that we have the right response, in my view. And I'm going to say a little bit more about school resource officers. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding among the public that school resource officers are police officers, just plain old police officers who are camped in a station, parked in a school, and they're there all day, and they really serve no purpose other than to look at kids and I'm going to arrest you or whatever. Or maybe not quite that draconian, but that's not what a school resource officer is. A school resource officer is a member of the Metropolitan Police Department, but who's been specially trained in working with kids. I would rather, if there's an incident, and a lot of incidents involving schools are outside the school, not inside the school, and the school resource officer responds, and I'd rather have a SRO respond than an untrained police officer, an officer who hasn't been trained to work with kids. And the school resource officers aren't parked in a school. They're assigned typically to multiple schools. They get to know the kids, the faculty, the principal, the neighborhood around that school, the issues in that neighborhood. That's their responsibility. And what we heard at that meeting, which was a meeting, the reason why there were 100 principals standing up is because it was a meeting only of principals, but they did all stand up. And there were several principals who commented that there could be an incident at the metro station nearby, and the principal doesn't know whether to be excusing the kids at the end of the day, high school kids at the end of the day. And the principal needs to rely on that school resource officer to give advice of what is safe for the kids leaving school and going home. So that's what I see with the school resource officers. It's very different than the picture I think a lot of folks have, which is just an ordinary cop parked in the school with nothing to do other than to arrest kids.
Do either of you have a last word here?
I just want to say thank you. It's great to see everybody in person, and I appreciate you focused on these big issues. And stick with us. These are discussions that will be ongoing about what's, I think, among the most important things that I will do as mayor, and that's set us on the right track and stabilize our economy and make sure we stay fiscally strong. It's another point that Phil and I are steady about. I believe now of the council members, you may be the only one that served in the last recession. And I was there in the last recession. Mayor Fenty was the mayor then. And I think that we all had a bird's eye on what it was like when we were in a downturn and had to make difficult decisions about how to keep our city running. I worry, and I think part of my focus is going to be working hand in hand with the council. If we do, and we may not, but if we do see downturns in our revenue, it's going to take all of us to make decisions about what's special about our city, what we need to keep our city safe, and what we need to keep our city growing, how we need to keep our city growing.
I think the only thing I'm going to add is just thank you all very much for inviting us, and it's good to see you all.
On behalf of the Committee of 100, I mean, we have a good crowd here, as you see. They came downtown, number one, in the rain, and they came to listen to the two of you. And we thank both of you for joining us here tonight, this evening. It was very good discussion. It's a good conversation. Thank you. There are refreshments, so join us outside.